Welcome to today's video. Today, we're going to play Underrated or Overrated, Gut Health Edition. I've collected some of the best, most interesting, and maybe most controversial theories and hypotheses around gut and digestive health. And I'm going to go through them with you and give you my opinion as to whether I think they're underrated or overrated. So let's get started. The first is the gut microbiome theory. This is a theory that the gut houses trillions of bacteria, fungi, and viruses that impact digestion, immunity, and mental health, and that maintaining this diverse microbiome is essential for good health. I think we're probably past the point where we're considering this a theory. I think this is closer to scientific fact. So I don't even know if we're going to be counting this one. I don't think it's underrated. I don't think it's overrated. I think it's just the truth. So we'll just move on to the next one. Number 2, the leaky gut hypothesis. This is a really great one. So this is the hypothesis that intestinal permeability allows toxins, undigested food, and pathogens to leak into the bloodstream, triggering inflammation and autoimmune responses. I personally think the leaky gut hypothesis is underrated. Now, if you're already nerdy enough to have clicked a gut health video, you are not like the majority of the population. If we could get it accepted in modern medicine that leaky gut is actually a real thing, and that there's a connection here to different inflammatory diseases and autoimmune conditions, I think we would be living on a completely different planet. So you might take leaky gut for granted as being true. I also take leaky gut for granted as being true. But in the grand scheme of things, I think leaky gut is significantly underrated. And this is going to be one of the biggest medical breakthroughs. People will really take the time to look at this and see this actually as a thing. Number 3, the gut-brain axis theory. This is the theory that the gut and the brain are connected through the vagus nerve and neurotransmitters. Gut health directly influences mood, anxiety, and cognitive function. This theory, again, definitely coming in underrated. If we could simply look at modern psychiatry or the approaches to mental health through the lens of the gut-brain axis, we would be living on a completely different planet. Instead of the first-line interventions for people with mental health problems being some kind of pharmaceutical medication or a talk-based therapy practice, if we instead took a look in their gut, if we looked at their vagus nerve, if we looked at the neurotransmitters in the gut and in the brain, and tried to look at this through a lens of the microbiome and the substances that the microbiome produces, we would completely change the mental health scene. We'd be looking at it through a completely different lens. So definitely, gut-brain axis theory, underrated. Number 4, we have the dysbiosis model. This is that imbalances in gut bacteria, also known as dysbiosis, lead to digestive disorders, metabolic issues, and inflammatory diseases. This one definitely has to go in underrated. It goes hand in hand with leaky gut. In fact, I would be fairly confident in suggesting that there's almost a 1-to-1 ratio with the leaky gut syndrome model, as we just mentioned, and the dysbiosis model. These two things go hand in hand. You have dysbiosis, and if you have dysbiosis, you will have a leaky gut. These are two faces of the same coin. They're one and the same thing. Number 5, 5R protocol for gut healing. This is a protocol where we remove irritants, replace enzymes, re-inoculate with probiotics, repair with nutrients, and rebalance lifestyle factors. I've personally heard of the 5Rs before. I've never heard of these 5Rs. As I remember it, the 5Rs used to have way more emphasis in this remove category, and we were looking at lots of antimicrobials, lots of killing things in the gut. And I'm somewhat opposed to that. So I would say that is overrated. However, in this context, it didn't say that. It said remove irritants. I would consider irritants anything that's pro-inflammatory. And the most common thing here is food that isn't being digested correctly and imbalanced microflora. So if we're removing irritants, I'd agree with that. So I'd say underrated. Replace enzymes. I think it's really hard to emphasize just how important enzymes are. So again, enzymes, underrated. Re-inoculate with probiotics, definitely underrated. Love probiotics so much. Repair with nutrients. Maybe this one I'm thinking a bit overrated. I'm thinking like bone broth. You know, everyone says, oh, you got to heal your gut. Like take glutamine, take bone broth. I think maybe a bit overrated on that one. Rebalance with lifestyle factors. Lifestyle factors includes things that are non-physical as well. I think underrated. So overall, underrated. Number 6, the second brain theory. This is a theory that the gut's enteric nervous system operates independently and influences emotions and behaviors, making it the second brain. I'm going to say in the way that it's phrased, overrated. I don't think the gut is a second brain. I think the enteric nervous system functions as part of the autonomic nervous system. I think that trying to create a separation between the enteric and the autonomic nervous system and see the enteric as its own thing is one step too far. So I'm going to say this one's a little bit overrated. Not that there's not merit and truth there, but I think we're taking a good thing too far. I'd much prefer to look at this through the angle of mind-body. We've got the intellect of the brain and conventional logic, and then we have the wisdom of intuition and that of somatic tissues like the autonomic nervous system. Number 7, fiber and prebiotic theory. This is a theory that prebiotic fibers, such as in garlic, onions, and bananas, feed beneficial bacteria, promoting gut balance. Absolutely is true. However, I think the emphasis on prebiotics is slightly overemphasized. Often the types of fiber that we're looking at are things like cellulose and not really these ideal prebiotics. I do think that there is a lot of research to be done here. And also if you're using specific prebiotics like human milk oligosaccharides, or in a spectrum, something like colostrum, or even these kind of like a bit more unique and niche prebiotics that are more challenging to find in nature, like partially hydrolyzed guar or lactulose. I think there's definitely some exploration to be done here. But I think this overall idea of like humans should be eating like an ungodly amount of fiber, I think the narrative is actually pushing it a little bit too far. So I'm going to say overrated. But it's not that the whole theory is overrated. It's the angle that we're taking with it. If we can go through a different angle, I think it would be significantly underrated. There's a lot of research and a lot of exploration to be done there. Number 8, Postbiotics Theory. This is a theory that fermentation by gut bacteria produces beneficial compounds like short-chain fatty acids that reduce inflammation. This would include, for example, butyrate. Now, I like the theory as a whole. I don't know how I feel about where postbiotic theory is kind of taking us. So this is ending up being things like butyrate supplements. And in my experience, I don't know how effective they really are. I would be much more inclined to try to correct the gut dysbiosis situation and then provide the fuel for the microbes to begin producing these short-chain fatty acids back in the gut instead of taking them exogenously. However, it's all about the point of context. If we're using butyrate, for example, in individuals with Crohn's disease, and it's helping them manage the inflammation and the damage to the gastrointestinal tract, and we're doing this through a natural mechanism instead of medication, I would be all for that. I think it's always really nice to go for a more natural option where we can. But I just don't know how much fruit is there. I don't know how much value there's going to be in exploring this in the long run. So I'm going to say mildly overrated. Number 9, low stomach acid hypothesis. This is the hypothesis that low stomach acid impairs digestion, nutrient absorption, and triggers acid reflux, bloating, and SIBO. I don't think this one is actually underrated or overrated. I think this one is spot on. I think it deserves the momentum and the attention that it's built up because it is a significant problem. So I'm going to say it's not underrated, it's not overrated, absolutely where it's supposed to be. Number 10, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, aka SIBO theory. This is a theory that bacterial overgrowth in the small intestine causes bloating, gas, and malabsorption, requiring dietary and antimicrobial treatments. I personally think this SIBO thing is massively overrated. I think that 80% of people that are experiencing what they believe is SIBO is actually dysbiosis, as described by the Dysbiosis Model above. The implication with SIBO is that it's simply a bacterial overgrowth, and consequently the treatment would be, as it says here, to treat with antimicrobials. I found in my experience this is not very effective. It's a very reductionist understanding on a very complex situation. The gut is a very complex place. And I think SIBO is massively overrated. If there was one thing in the alternative health space that I could just destroy, it would be SIBO. If I could make it so that SIBO was never coined as a term, I would get rid of it. Because although it is moving us forward in some ways, I think in many other ways, it's also doing a lot more harm than good because it's negatively influencing our understanding of how we're looking at this kind of problem. And it's leading us down the wrong avenue. So SIBO, so far, the most overrated thing on this list. Number 11, the gut immune axis. This is a theory that over 70% of the immune system resides in the gut, highlighting its role in immune regulation and inflammation control. I think this one significantly underrated, especially when you consider the modern interventions that are being used to try to help people have strong immune systems. And we've come to a place where we're basically poking things into our body instead of trusting our body to have these natural strong immune responses. I think we've completely missed the point. The strength from our immune system comes from our mucosal immunity, and the bastion of our mucosal immunity is based in our gut. I truly think this one significantly underrated. And in the next 100 years, we're going to be asking all these questions. How did we get this so wrong? How are we so far off the mark? Number 12, stress and gut health theory. This is the theory that chronic stress impacts gut motility, microbial balance, and intestinal permeability through HPA axis dysfunction. This one's tricky. I think it's underrated in some ways and overrated in the other. I think it's overrated in the fact that when you hear the word stress, you think about work stress, you think about financial stress, you think about family stress and having kids. And there's not enough emphasis put on the fact that physiological stress causes the same dysfunction through the HPA axis. For example, if you sprain your ankle, if you're in chronic pain, if you're chronically exposed to some sort of environmental toxicity, or if you have a nutritional deficiency, this creates physiological stress. And this physiological stress has the same impact as psychological and emotional stress. I think the psychological and emotional stress is massively overrated, but I think the physiological stress is significantly underrated. So this one's split. This one has polarity to it. Number 13, fasting and gut repair theory. This is a theory that intermittent fasting and longer fasts promote autophagy, reduce inflammation, and allow gut repair by resting the digestive system. I think this one is hugely underrated. There's a big point they didn't even touch on here. I have seen that utilizing fasting significantly influences the composition of the microbiome. Whether it's doing it through the mechanisms it outlined here, autophagy, reducing inflammation, and gut repair, or whether it's something more directly influencing the gut microbiome, I don't know. There simply isn't data. But what I can say is fasting is the most ancient and profound healing tool we have in our toolbox. Every single animal in nature utilizes fasting when it needs it. So we would be silly or arrogant to not use this tool to its maximum potential. Number 14, Candida Overgrowth Hypothesis. This is the theory that yeast overgrowth, also known as Candida, in the gut can lead to fatigue, brain fog, and sugar cravings, requiring antifungal diets and treatments. I think the whole Candida thing is massively blown out of proportion, very poorly understood, and hugely overrated. Not to say there isn't a kernel of truth here. We've moved away from an ancestrally appropriate diet. We eat a lot of processed refined foods with lots of refined sugars. We're exposed to antibiotics all of the time. These encourage the growth of yeasts in our digestive system. The solution isn't to try to balance the antibiotics with antifungals. It's to try to bring these things back to balance in a natural way through some of the things we've already talked about, the dietary changes, the microbiome balance, correcting gut dysbiosis. So I think with the way that it's going, it's massively overrated. If we could change the direction a little bit, there are many results to be gained here because this is a very significant part of gut dysbiosis presentations. I will say it's very rare to see somebody with Candida overgrowth when they aren't also dealing with some kind of chronic toxicity. It's almost like the Candida is an adaptive response to the toxicity in their environment. Number 15, biofilm disruption theory. This is the theory that pathogenic bacteria and fungi form biofilms, protective layers, that resist treatment, requiring enzymes and natural antimicrobials for elimination. I think overall this theory is probably slightly overrated. It's definitely true. Biofilms do exist. However, our beneficial organisms produce biofilms as well. As it's explaining here, the natural treatment that you would use would be natural antimicrobials and enzymes. However, if you're eating a species-appropriate diet, if you're consuming foods that are allowing you to support your natural production of digestive enzymes, you're going to be producing things that are breaking these biofilms down naturally. Even eating simple things like fresh vegetable juice or fermented foods provide you with plenty of enzymes that have biofilm disrupting capabilities. One of the most powerful biofilm disruptors is nattokinase, which is present in natto fermented soybeans. So you can see how fermented foods, probiotics, and incorporating these as a part of our diet, or maybe the fact that these things aren't a part of our diet is actually the cause of these problems. And instead of trying to disrupt the biofilms, we should try to bring ourselves back into balance. Number 16, the mucosal barrier theory. This is the theory that the gut lining's mucosal layer prevents pathogens from entering the bloodstream, and its integrity is key for preventing inflammation. This kind of goes hand in hand with leaky gut. However, there is a slight difference. Leaky gut is the one cell thick lining that you have that separates your bloodstream from what's happening in your digestive system. The mucosal barrier is this mucus-like secretion that sits on top of this gut lining. This is where all of our beneficial bacteria live. What I can say is that when one is damaged, so is the other. So if you have leaky gut, you probably have a damaged mucosa. And if you have a damaged mucosa, probably have a damaged gut lining as well. So I think this kind of gets the same result as leaky gut. This has to be underrated. 17, food sensitivity theory. This is the theory that undiagnosed food sensitivities like gluten, dairy, and soy contribute to chronic gut inflammation and systemic issues. I personally think this one's actually a little bit overrated. The thought process being that simply removing these foods is the solution. However, I would combat this by saying, in my experience, most people that are experiencing food sensitivities are reacting to foods because they've lost the ability to digest them. And just removing those foods, whilst that does provide temporary relief and should be done in the short term, isn't a long-term solution. Instead, we need to try and look at the dysfunction underneath, correct that dysfunction, and it re-enables the body's ability to break down, digest, and absorb that food again. So I think the theory overall is underrated. I think a lot of people are eating foods they can't digest, and it's triggering inflammation, gut inflammation, systemic issues, autoimmunity. However, the conventional approach of just simply removing these foods, I don't think it's the angle that we should be taking here. Number 18, probiotic and strain-specific effects. This is the theory that different probiotic strains serve specific purposes, such as lactobacillus for lactose digestion and bifidobacteria for reducing inflammation. I'm going to say overall, I think this theory is slightly overrated. I do think there's truth there. However, the common denominator when you look at the microbiome is that strength is directly correlated with the diversity. Instead of focusing on all these individual and singular little strains, we should try to work on building a robust, diverse microbiome. And honestly, if you're at the point where you've got so much diversity, so much strength in variety of numbers in your gut, who really cares if you have this one or that one? As long as you're overall a very healthy being, it doesn't really matter. And I think for the average person, that's really all they care about. Number 19, polyphenol pathway theory. This is a theory that plant-based polyphenols in foods like berries, tea, chocolate, act as prebiotics, enhancing microbial diversity and reducing oxidative stress. I personally believe this is hugely underrated. This is exactly the part where, in the previous point where we were talking about prebiotics and fibers, this is what's missing. If we can bring more of this polyphenol pathway conversation to the prebiotic conversation, we're going to be so much closer to understanding a more holistic picture, because these polyphenols not only act as prebiotics, they are actually selectively antimicrobial. Not only do they feed the beneficial organisms, they're selectively inhibitory to negative or pathogenic organisms. If you look in nature, you never find fiber just as fiber. It always has some kind of plant polyphenol compounds alongside it. And this is the missing piece. This is what we're not looking at when it comes to microbiome dysbiosis and fiber. Number 20, gut-driven autoimmunity theory. This is a theory that leaky gut and dysbiosis may trigger autoimmune diseases like Hashimoto's thyroiditis and rheumatoid arthritis. Personally, I think it's hard to make a distinction between this and the point we already talked about with leaky gut. I think this is massively underrated. Conventional medical treatments for things like autoimmune-based arthritis are basically immunosuppressive medications, and they have a lot of negative consequences because you need an immune system. You don't have it for no reason. If you have to suppress your immune function with immunosuppressants, you're weakening your body's ability to fight off colds and flus and infections and things that could be potentially very, very dangerous and even life-threatening. So if we can find any other avenue to tackle autoimmune diseases without completely destroying the individual's immune system, I think that we definitely should. So I would say this, definitely underrated. Number 21, motility and migrating motor complex, MMC. This is the theory that proper gut motility, regulated by the MMC, prevents bacterial buildup and constipation, and that slow motility can lead to SIBO and bloating. I think that this is very underrated. However, I think the approach that we've kind of been taking to it, again, isn't necessarily the right approach. The main way that people seem to be tackling this theory is by increasing things like serotonin in the gut through supplementation of 5-HTP, or even using motility-enhancing medications like proculopride. In my experience, the thing that I have found that impacts the MMC the most in a negative way is trauma. Unprocessed emotional events seem to have a significantly inhibitory effect on the MMC. I personally struggled with this a lot, and by working through my trauma and letting go and healing, I've seen improvements in my motility that I haven't been able to achieve through natural, alternative, or even pharmaceutical interventions. However, I can imagine that's really alternative and very difficult to study. But I do think overall, this theory, massively underrated. We really need to do some more research here. Number 22, the pH and gut health hypothesis. This is the theory that optimal pH levels in the stomach and intestines are crucial for enzyme activation, pathogen control, and microbiome balance. This one I'm going to have to say absolutely underrated. Why did I not learn about these things in school? I learned a little bit about pH level. Why were these two things never connected? These are so important. The understanding that I currently have of digestive health is massively influenced by this understanding that different foods require different pH ranges to digest. And this is one of the fundamental principles behind the school of thought called food combining. This is an approach where we change the way that we eat so that we support the digestion of the foods we're consuming. For example, proteins in animal products require a very strong acid, whereas starches require a mildly alkaline environment. If you consume them together in the same meal, they have an inhibitory effect on each other's digestion and therefore create problems, especially for people with weaker digestive systems. I think overall this is hugely underrated. We need to put a lot more research into this because there are some really, really important results that can be found by understanding this at a deeper level. Number 23, histamine intolerance theory. This is the theory that imbalanced gut bacteria may lead to histamine buildup, causing migraines, skin issues, and digestive problems. I'm going to say this is massively underrated because there are so many people that are living with histamine intolerance and they have no idea what's going on. I personally had histamine intolerance and I have managed to 100% completely reverse this condition by working on my gut bacteria. By improving my digestive health, I've improved my tolerance to histamine. I now have 0 symptoms of histamine intolerance and I'm able to eat all of the high histamine foods that I like, including cheese, wine, chocolate, without any histamine intolerance symptoms whatsoever. This theory, massively underrated. We need to do more research. There needs to be more understanding developed around histamine intolerance and how it is connected to what's happening in the digestive system. Number 24, endotoxin and inflammatory theory. This is the theory that lipopolysaccharides from gram-negative bacteria in the gut can cross the gut barrier, triggering systemic inflammation and metabolic disorders. This theory, absolutely massively underrated. I can't believe I had chronic fatigue syndrome and I went to see so many doctors. Nobody even told me what an endotoxin was. Nobody had even hinted or suggested that my digestive system could be potentially influencing some of the symptoms I was experiencing. It goes so much further than that. Chronic fatigue syndrome and chronic inflammation, they're two really big points. But also chronic brain fog, autoimmune problems, especially things like anxiety and depression. These are really connected to endotoxin exposure. In fact, the way that antidepressant medications are tested for efficacy is They are given to people who have been exposed to endotoxin as it causes depression. We know that we have gram-negative bacteria in the gut. We know that they produce endotoxin. We know that endotoxin creates inflammation in the body. These are not theories. These are facts. These have been proven. This is science. So this endotoxin and inflammation theory really needs to be taken to the next level. We need to see more strategic and clinical interventions around these theories. 25, the final one on the list for today. Evolutionary theory of gut health. This is the theory that modern diets and lifestyle have disrupted the ancestral gut microbiome, leading to disease. Returning to traditional diets, including fermented foods, whole grains, etc., could restore balance. I think this is a really nice one to end the video on because it really sums up everything we've talked about today. We've come so far away from what we are supposed to be eating. All of the things that we've looked at on this list, if we look at it through this lens of evolutionary theory, makes so much sense. We don't eat the foods that we used to. We don't have the bacteria in our gut that we used to. We're so far away from the ancestral life that we had even 500 years ago, but go back 5,000 years and you'll see huge differences. I think this theory really underrated. I'd never actually heard of it until today, whereas I'd heard of just about every single other one on this list. But this really sums it up. If we can figure out how to change our modern diets and lifestyles so that we can incorporate more of this ancestral wisdom, I'm sure that it's possible for us to restore the ancestral health to our gut microbiome. So I'd say this one underrated and an absolutely phenomenal place to finish today's video. I'd be really interested to hear which of these theories resonated with you. Do you think I was off on any of these? Do you think I was a little bit too harsh on some or maybe a little bit too lenient on others? Let me know what you think. I would really love to hear what you have to say. And if you'd like me to review any more theories, be sure to leave me a comment and I'll get back to you below. And if you feel like you want to leave a comment, but you're not really sure what to say, just leave me a little comment of a takeaway that you got from today's video. Something interesting, something new that's going to influence your decision-making process from now on. So that's everything for me today. Take care. Hope you enjoyed and I'll see you in the next one.